We always had a wood shop when I was growing up. My dad loved woodworking. He was a pattern maker with Chris Craft boats. So we had a shop at home, and it seemed natural when we got married that we should have a shop too. So began looking for equipment. Of course, didn't have any money for anything. So the machines I found were always old, used machines that I'd have to fix up. I think it was probably the mid-'80s. Fine Woodworking put out a book called Fine Woodworking on Wood Machines. The cover had this beautiful bandsaw, and it featured an article from a guy down in Georgia, I think, who put together this line shaft driven shop, and that just started an inspiration to do something like this. The city of Holland decided they were just going to demolish the old Western Machine Tool building, which gave me the opportunity to get some line shaft and counter shafts, and a lot of this was in that building. A place in Holland had demolished the old Grand Haven Brass Works, and they had the beams, so I was able to get beams from them, and we just started putting it together. In between projects or whatever, I'd come out in the evening and clean a sectional line shaft up again and get it hung, and it was just a fun project. The first machine that I had available to me was the wood lathe. It was a lathe I grew up with. Came out of the Zeeland wood turning works. Unfortunately, they had cut the Babbitt bearings off and mounted ball bearings on it. I ended up taking the ball bearings back off and putting Babbitt bearings back on it again. This was at the Western Machine Tool Works as well, and everything was frozen up on it. It was completely rusted, so we spent weeks just breaking parts loose. These were the old Camelback drill presses. A friend gave me that old drill, which was actually made for drilling the pockets for sash pulleys in windows. That belonged to a young man just north of us here. He was actually using it. He had mounted a motor on it. So I had a newer 12-inch little Parks planer, so I actually ended up trading him for this one and put pulleys on it to run it off the line shaft. But other than that, that one was pretty much ready to go. That again is just neat looking machine. It's got beautiful lines. I was a joiner. I found that up in northern Michigan. A fellow owned a sawmill, and he had this sitting off in a shed, and it was quite badly rusted. The windows, they were up in the McInerney Spring and Wire building. That probably was one of the biggest changes. All of a sudden it changed from a pole building kind of a look to you could be standing in a 100-year-old factory somewhere. This was such a classic looking thing. Came out of Kendall Furniture in Grand Rapids. It's a jigsaw or a scroll saw. So they've got springs here which go to this leather strap, and that keeps continual tension on the blade. And Kendall must have had these nameplates cast for them to identify their machines, which really an amazing thing to do. The old table saw is a Dodds, which was made in Grand Rapids, just down the road. This horsehair picker, this came out of Baker Furniture, and they would have, of course, used horsehair to stuff their upholstered furniture. And back in the day, of course, they would use the long hairs out of the mane and the tail to stuff cushions. And these were made to card those long hairs. This was a little combination sander I'd picked up from a guy in a little town just north of us. It's not hard to do a horizontal line, but on this one you got to get to vertical. So you need a twist in that belt, a quarter twist, to make it work. And that's the fun part of it. An interesting part of doing all of this is your speeds. You've got one main shaft that's running at a certain speed. It's about 300 to 400 RPMs. Well, everything off of that, you change the speed by going to smaller and bigger pulleys. So like on a joiner where you want a real high-speed machine, you go from a bigger pulley to a smaller pulley, increasing speed as you go. Whereas like on that sander, I go from a very small pulley to a bigger pulley on the machine to slow that down. This is an old boring machine that actually came from Millcraft down in Elgin. What is so neat about this one is the dual spindle. They made this in such a way that you can adjust the distances between these. You can also rotate one of them up, but it's always in contact with the gear to drive both spindles. It's actually made for clamping up mitered frames, and as you tighten it, everything comes together to pull all four joints together. Post drills, they were a hand-operated drill press, and that would have been a staple in most every shop. The bandsaw came from a young man and his wife down in Missouri, just a great young couple. His grandfather, back in the 1800s, started a woodworking shop on the East Coast, and this he bought as a used machine when he started that business. The bandsaw took a lot of work. I probably spent 3 weeks working on that. The casting was in pretty rough shape, so it took a lot of filling and painting. Such a beautiful machine. You kind of lament the passing of beautiful design. It's an amazing feeling to stand in here working on something with all of this running and try to imagine who was that guy that was standing in front of the bandsaw 100 years ago. What was his life like and what was the world like then? It's a good thing to do.